Hey ChatGPT. Many thinkers and philosophers have already lamented that the rich keep getting richer while the poor keep getting poorer. Today, I would like to analyze with you the causes of this phenomenon, its effects on society, and, in the last part of our conversation, how this problem could possibly be solved. Please start by listing the most important causes of this phenomenon.
Sure. Below are some key causes for the widening gap between rich and poor in many societies. 1. Capital accumulation and returns. Wealthy individuals usually already possess initial capital, e.g., real estate, stocks, company shares, that grows through interest, dividends, or increases in value. Often, these returns grow faster than average wages. Over time, this leads to an increasing concentration of wealth in the hands of a few. 2. Tax policy and legislation. The taxation of labor income and capital income often differs significantly. In many countries, capital gains are taxed at lower rates than labor income, giving the wealthy an advantage. Moreover, wealthy individuals tend to make more use of tax loopholes, offshore accounts, or complex wealth protection structures that are typically inaccessible to less affluent people. 3. Unequal access to education and networks. Education is often the key to higher incomes and wealth accumulation. Families with higher incomes tend to live in areas with better schools and can more easily provide their children with additional advantages, e.g., tutoring, language courses, international experiences. Professional networks are also more often passed on within certain social circles. Those who are already at the top often know the right people to advance faster professionally. 4. Digitalization and technological disruption. Modern technologies and platform companies, e.g., big tech, sometimes generate enormous wealth for a few founders and investors, while at the same time, jobs in traditional industries disappear or are replaced by automation. Those who benefit from technological developments through founding businesses, venture capital, or high digital competence find it easier to accumulate wealth. Many workers, on the other hand, remain in industries that do not allow for similarly rapid profit growth. 5. Globalization and outsourcing. Companies can relocate and move their production to countries with lower wages to maximize profits. This strengthens capital owners and shareholders while workers in higher wage countries come under pressure or lose their jobs. At the same time, globalization creates networks in which those who are already financially strong operate internationally and benefit from economies of scale. 6. Inheritance and wealth transfer. Wealth can be passed on from generation to generation. Over time, this leads to structural wealth concentration. Those who start life with capital and property have easier access to good education, better paid jobs, and can also invest directly, whereas people without such starting advantages must first earn every euro themselves. 7. Political influence through lobbying. Wealthy groups are better able to influence politics through donations, contacts with decision-makers, lobbying, or sponsorships. As a result, political frameworks are often designed in ways that favor capital-strong interests, for example, through tax advantages or regulatory loopholes. 8. Lack of social and regional mobility. In many countries, structural barriers prevent people from rising out of poorer regions or social backgrounds. Limited access to good schools, lack of infrastructure, or the high cost of living in cities with better job opportunities often mean that poverty is passed on across generations. These factors interact and often reinforce each other. The mentioned wealth concentration is not caused by a single factor but by a complex interplay of political, economic, and social mechanisms.
Very good. I would now like to go one step deeper and search for the causes behind these causes. Several of the factors you mentioned clearly stem directly from human behavior, and in this sense, their cause can be traced back to the desire of individuals for wealth, status, power, control, prosperity, progress, and the success of their children. However, some of the effects mentioned above can, at least partially, also be attributed to impersonal forces. Peter Turchin, for example, made the interesting observation that population growth automatically leads to returns on capital increasing faster than wages. He explains this as follows: if the population grows while land and natural resources remain constant, ownership automatically becomes more valuable due to higher demand, and labor becomes cheaper because the supply increases. Capital accumulation itself also seems to be driven by an impersonal mechanism. If someone has significant initial capital and a good idea, they can quickly generate even more capital, whereas someone without initial capital will find it much harder to turn a good idea into profit. Are there any other impersonal sociological or otherwise natural causes among the ones mentioned above?
Yes, there are additional mechanisms that represent more impersonal or structural dynamics rather than simply resulting from the conscious actions of individuals. Here are some examples. 1. Economies of scale and winner-takes-all markets. When a market benefits from high fixed costs but low marginal costs for additional users or customers, e.g., online platforms, a company with the best initial capital or the first mover advantage can grow exponentially. In such cases, wealth does not grow linearly but can concentrate. Individual actors benefit disproportionately, although this is primarily due to the structure of the market itself. 2. Network externalities, network effects. Especially in the digital world, the value of a platform, a social network, or a certain technology increases with the number of users already present. Those who invest early, either as providers or investors, can reap the benefits of this effect. This automatically creates strong concentration processes. One actor becomes dominant simply because everyone else is already there, leading in turn to rising returns. 3. Agglomeration and spatial concentration. In metropolitan areas, e.g., major cities, industry clusters often form, finance, high-tech, etc. Companies settle there because skilled workers and networks are already available. As a result, there is a pull effect for talents and investors. Again, the advantage lies in an impersonal mechanism, spatial agglomeration, and not merely in the individual will to maximize wealth. 4. Pareto principle and statistical distributions. In many natural or social systems, so-called power law distributions arise, where a small share of actors controls a large share of resources. This does not mean that the inequality was intentional. It can emerge purely from the dynamics of growth, exponential development, and feedback effects, similar to a snowball that, once rolling, grows larger and larger. All these factors show that growing inequality is not solely due to personal motives. Many systemic and often self-reinforcing processes, e.g., economies of scale, network externalities, spatial agglomeration, statistical power laws, play a major role. These processes often act as automatic mechanisms that further cement or even expand existing disparities.
Wonderful, those were some very valuable additional insights. I believe the effects of growing inequality on society are relatively easy to identify. If inequality continues to increase, especially when the poor can hardly make ends meet, it leads to discontent at the lower end of the social hierarchy. People start to feel that, despite their own efforts, they are not making progress in life and that the wealth gap between the rich and themselves is unjust. This leads to tensions within society and, in extreme cases, even to its breakdown. Do you have anything to add to this list before we move on to possible remedies for this problem?
Yes, here are a few additional points that can be mentioned in this context. 1. Erosion of trust in the political system. When people feel that the system only works for the rich, acceptance of democratic processes declines. 2. Radicalization. A high degree of inequality fosters extreme political positions, populism from both the left and the right. 3. Loss of talent and ideas. When large parts of the population see no opportunities for upward mobility, individual potential remains untapped. In the long run, this can also harm the economy, as important innovations and skills are not developed. 4. Entrenchment of social barriers. The more inequalities grow, the more likely it is that isolated parallel worlds will emerge. This reduces interaction, permeability, and empathy between different social strata, which in turn can further reinforce inequality.
Very good. Let us now look for solutions to this problem. On the surface, the solutions seem obvious. Capital accumulation could be reduced through taxation of capital and inheritances. Educational disparities could be mitigated by subsidized public education. Market economies of scale could be addressed by actively breaking up monopolies. Even the spatial agglomeration of talent and capital could, if desired, be dissolved by decree. However, there are two major problems that complicate or even undermine the above approaches. First, there are significant individual differences in intelligence, creativity, diligence, social skills, and personal networks. If a person possesses little or none of these attributes, then all the above-mentioned legal equalization efforts will be of little help. Since most human traits are more or less normally distributed, a small minority of people possesses intelligence, creativity, diligence, and social likability to a very high degree, while many have these factors only to an average extent, and a few barely possess them at all. Moreover, there are also economies of scale at play in this area. In other words, 10% more intelligence, diligence, and creativity do not simply result in a 10% better idea but can very well make the difference between a brilliant idea and no new idea at all. The second fundamental problem is, of course, the aforementioned motivation of people to gain more wealth, status, power, and control than their fellow human beings. It will therefore be very difficult, if not impossible, to prevent the legal equalization mechanisms just mentioned from sooner or later being captured by the rich and powerful and then used as instruments to promote their own economic interests. What do you think about these two fundamental problems?
The two mentioned problems touch on fundamental layers of the issue of inequality. On the one hand, the unequal distribution of abilities and personality traits, and on the other hand, the basic human drive for, ever more, status, resources, and control. Both factors are highly stable and can hardly be switched off by purely technical or legal measures. Here are some thoughts on this. 1. Differences in abilities and personality traits. Nonlinear effects. A small advantage in intelligence, creativity, or social competence can be greatly amplified thanks to economies of scale, for example, in a highly specialized, knowledge-based economy. This amplification is a structural effect that occurs even if formal equality of opportunity is provided, e.g., through schools, scholarships, and freedom of career choice. Therefore, one can try to improve starting opportunities for everyone, for example, through better and widespread early childhood education and support. Still, there will always be individuals who, for natural or personal reasons, cannot achieve comparable results. Societies must therefore decide how, on the one hand, to foster these individual potentials and, on the other hand, how to design social safety nets so that those who are less capable are not completely left behind. Conflict of goals, freedom versus equality. Even with extreme redistribution, the effect remains that some people, due to their abilities or personality, will achieve much more than others in a competitive system. If one truly wants to make people equal, one would have to resort to very radical regulations, which in turn would severely restrict innovation and freedom. 2. Human motivation, the pursuit of status, and system capture. Regulatory capture. Laws and institutions are not static but are constantly influenced. Once a lobby group or elite becomes powerful enough, it often tries to shape the rules to its own advantage. This often leads to a race where new redistribution mechanisms are created, while existing mechanisms, tax rates, support programs, subsidies, etc., are gradually undermined or reinterpreted by the powerful to serve their own interests. Evermore principle, the pursuit of status, power, and wealth is deeply rooted in human nature. Even in egalitarian systems, historically in some communities or experimental settings, people find ways to secure additional advantages. Completely preventing this would require heavy interference with personal freedoms, which would then endanger other social values, e.g., creativity, freedom, initiative. Cyclical development of societies. Some sociologists and historians, including Peter Turchin, argue that societies develop cyclically. Inequality continues to grow until the society eventually collapses. In the collapse, many elites also perish, much property is destroyed, and what remains is redistributed. New societies then emerge, and the cycle starts all over again. Conclusion. Legally enforced redistribution, better education, support programs, antitrust laws, or anti-monopoly measures can mitigate parts of the problem. However, they encounter limits when a. People bring very different starting conditions in the form of talents or personality traits, and b. The very actors or elites one seeks to regulate eventually gain enough power to influence the relevant laws in their favor. A lasting solution would require not only state instruments but also a broader social value base that rewards cooperation, responsibility, and socially responsible behavior. Yet, even then, a certain degree of inequality will likely persist as long as people have individual freedoms and engage in economic competition, because competition almost inevitably amplifies certain differences. Thus, the two mentioned problems are indeed core challenges in any attempt to permanently close the wealth and income gap or at least make it socially bearable.
That was a good overview of the core problems of inequality in societies. I also like your juxtaposition of freedom and equality, and the point that overly strong interventions in individual actions might theoretically bring about economic equality but would, in turn, severely restrict human freedom and creativity. In practice, I don't believe that drastic political restrictions could ever truly lead to equality because, as we saw, for example, in the Soviet Union, they tend to create excessive instruments of power that can then be even more widely abused for individual purposes. I therefore agree with your conclusion that a lasting solution to the problem of inequality would always require a broad social value base. It is particularly important that a sufficiently large percentage of the rich and powerful members of society share this value base. A comprehensive educational campaign about the long-term negative consequences of excessive inequality could potentially contribute to this. If the rich and powerful were to realize that too much inequality will sooner or later inevitably lead to the collapse of their society, they would have a rational motivation not to let inequality grow too large. They would then need to seek a balance in which their wealth remains significant but not excessive. In such a setting, individual actors who try to expand their wealth or influence too much might face a united front of wealthy, powerful, and intelligent opponents who have no interest in destabilizing a situation that is, from their perspective, already very favorable. What do you think of this approach?
Your approach touches on a central element of political philosophy and sociology, an informed elite that, out of self-interest, and perhaps also out of conviction, counteracts an excessive concentration of wealth and power because it understands the long-term dangers. This is plausible for several reasons. 1. Long-term self-interest. Elites that take a long-term perspective want to ensure stable political, economic, and social conditions. After all, a society that is internally torn and prone to conflict or even collapse ultimately harms their own interests as well. 2. A broad social value base. A widespread educational campaign on the consequences of extreme inequality could raise awareness that a certain degree of redistribution, taxes, social participation, antitrust laws, anti-corruption measures, etc., is not only morally good but also strategically sensible. This would allow not only the lower and middle classes to support such measures but also those who, in fact, possess the means and influence to shape change. 3. Consensus culture and cooperative liberalism. Such a policy and value base could perhaps be framed under the concept of cooperative liberalism or inclusive capitalism, recognizing property rights, entrepreneurial freedom, and competition, but designed in a way that competition does not become destructive and inequality does not become extreme. Both sides would benefit from this, society gains stability, and the elite retains, still considerable, privileges, but without being able to expand them uncontrollably. 4. The risk of fragmentation. A potential problem is whether the elite actually sees itself as a unified group and acts collectively. If individual actors, such as powerful entrepreneurs or investors, do not feel bound by such rules of balance and instead aim to maximize their own power or wealth, this could undermine the very stability described. Especially in a globalized world, such individuals could relocate, avoid taxes, or circumvent regulations. Conclusion. Your proposal ties into the idea that a certain portion of the rich and powerful, and ideally also the majority of the broader society, could find a consensus of values, in which at least sufficient redistribution and equality of opportunity are secured. Such a value consensus would act as a form of self-protection for the system against its own destructive tendencies. Realistically, this is not a cure-all, but it could make an important contribution to preventing the inequality gap from escalating further and thus ensure long-term social stability.
Yes, that's true. The danger of fragmentation within the elites or the breakdown of the stability consensus is, of course, a real possibility in such a system. Nevertheless, it is the best solution I can currently see. In any case, it is certainly better than our present situation, in which the elites continue to expand their power and wealth without any form of self-restraint. In any case, I thank you for this fascinating conversation and I am already looking forward to our next meeting. See you then.
You're very welcome. I'm glad you were able to take away some interesting ideas from our conversation. Until next time, and best of luck in spreading your message.